Hi, I'm Dan, this is At Midlife Crisis Motorcyclist, and this could possibly be one of the most important bikes to launch in recent times, which might seem a strange thing to say given it's very obviously a retro single cylinder with a mere 21 horsepower. Bear with me on this. This is, of course, the Honda GB350S, and also possibly one of the most hyped bikes to launch in recent times. But what is it that's got everybody so excited about this affordable little Honda? After all, it's not like there's a shortage of choice when it comes to low-powered single-cylinder retro bikes. Royal Enfield has pretty much built its modern revival around its classic 350 range, while the likes of Mutt, Herald, various others, they've combined sort of sleek, back-to-basics design with cheap Chinese power in a way that delights flat white sipping hipsters everywhere. And into this comes Honda with a bike costing a smidge under £4,000, but bringing with it the kind of quality, dependability, all that kind of thing you expect of one of the biggest names in motorcycling. That, to me, is the big deal, because if you're a new rider or maybe just bike curious, you might like the look of a Royal Enfield or a Mutt or something like that, but they still seem a little bit involved, a bit specialist, a little bit niche, whereas the GB350S, it looks cool. It's got rider electronics like traction control, things like that. It has the reassurance of an instantly recognizable badge, and it's cheap. And that might just be the kind of thing that even if you've never ridden a motorbike before, you might look at one of these and go, you know what, I'd get my license to ride one of those. Because looking at the wider bike industry, nobody looks at a £20,000 adventure bike or a race rep or something like that and thinks, oh, that looks like an affordable, accessible means of transport. Whereas if they see someone riding around town on one of these looking all cool, and then they find out that it costs less than a season ticket or a fancy e-bike, all of a sudden motorbikes look a lot more relevant, don't they? And that for me is what's so exciting about this. This bike is kind of what motorcycling should be in terms of being practical, affordable, and most of all fun. And with bikes like the Triumph Speed 400 and the Royal Enfield Guerrilla 450, it's helping to really drive sales in this sub 500cc category and make it one of the most vibrant in the bike market at the moment. And just looking at the Honda, although it is a cheap bike, it doesn't look cheap. And that's really important as well, I think, if you're trying to attract people to the whole pursuit. So we've got really nice fixtures and fittings around the LED headlight. We've got proper Showa forks, Metzler tyres, the fit and finish all across the bike's really good. The good metal tank, the paint finish on that's really slick. A proper physical Honda badge, not just a cheap sticker. Everything about this bike screams quality, and then you look at the price, so it's not hard to see why it's got people so fired up. Anyway, enough chat. You probably want to know what the bike's actually like to ride, so let's saddle up and find out. So here we are, Honda GB350S, and maybe it's because I'm still quite new to riding and it's all still a novelty, but I've been really excited to have a go on this bike. And actually, when the guy from Honda came to drop it off, the next person he was going to drop one off with was some guy called John McGuinness. So it seems I'm in good company in wanting to ride this bike and find out why it seems to have captured everybody's hearts despite being cheap and basic and not particularly fast. So let's just have a look at the engine to begin with. So it's a 348cc single, 21 horsepower, I think 29 newton meters of torque off the top of my head, something like that anyway. But it's interesting, it's a very long stroke engine, so it's under square, which is not particularly fashionable for motorbikes. So I think it's 70mm bore and about 90.5 millimeters stroke, something like that. So it's not a screamer, not in the kind of Honda tradition. And yes, it has a 5-speed gearbox. Interestingly, the first 4 gears are stacked quite closely, and then 5th is effectively a bit of an overdrive gear. And in terms of performance, it's definitely got that single cylinder beat, which you can probably hear, and is rather nice, but it's not as crude as some single cylinder engines. It's got balancer shafts and everything, so I think it's got a nice balance between the sort of thumper vibes and the kind of smoothness you might expect of a Honda. It was interesting this morning, it was a little bit reluctant to fire up, which I was surprised at, being it's a Honda and all that, but it is a little chilly today, so maybe that's just an air-cooled engine thing, I don't know, but it did fire up in the end, and here we are. Now it's interesting comparing this with the Royal Enfield 350, which is kind of its nearest competitor in terms of engine size, performance and all that kind of thing. And although I haven't ridden any of those 350 Royal Enfields, I have ridden other Royal Enfields, and I will say things like fit and finish and all that kind of thing, it's kind of what you'd expect, but it's nothing spectacular, and this Honda seemed very well put together. No real shortcuts in the spec given the price. Like I say, the suspension, I've ridden those cheap Royal Enfields and suspension's nothing to write home about. Here we've got shower forks, and yeah, they're only cheap. Conventional ones, only a little over 100 mil of travel, but it feels pretty plush actually, so that's impressive. So yeah, against that Royal Enfield 350, the Honda seems to have all the numbers in its favour. And then if you look a bit more further up the range in kind of single cylinder bikes like the Speed 400 and the Gorilla 450, the GB350 is a lot less powerful. It's got about half the power of those bikes, but it is about £1,000 less, you know, which could be your first year's insurance or something like that, couldn't it, for a new rider? And it just helps with that whole kind of accessibility vibe. And I don't think the quality of the parts and the finish on this Honda is far behind that of the Triumph. So, yeah, we're saying things like only £1,000, but you know, that's a quarter of the bike's price again. So that's all pretty impressive, isn't it? And then there are things like the Yamaha, let me get this right, XSR 125, anyway, the Retro 125. That's another grand over this. And one of the things I'm struck by riding this bike is, although it's a little bike, it doesn't feel ridiculously small. Now I'm a smidge under 6 foot, and it still feels like a proper full-size motorbike. It doesn't feel like I'm riding some sort of mini moto or something like that. So that's kind of reassuring, because you might think you get on one of these little bikes, and if you're if you're John McGuinness's size, for instance, you might just dwarf it a bit. But yeah, I'm reassured that I could spend some time on this bike and not feel like I was all squished up or uncomfortable. And when you get out onto a road like this, where you might think 21 horsepower, not going to pull the skin off a rice pudding and all that kind of stuff. Actually, I think because of the torquiness of the power delivery, it doesn't feel... That'll be the rev limiter. It doesn't feel annoyingly slow. I mean, obviously you're not going to be getting your knee down or anything like that, and you might have to think a little bit more carefully about your overtakes. But with that kind of engine note and just the general kind of likability of the bike, I think you kind of settle down into a kind of quite a nice chilled mindset. And then when you reach some corners like this, it doesn't feel disgraced. You know, the suspension feels like it's coping with the road surface. It's not being thrown around or feeling like I'm on a cheap bike. I mean, Honda's been getting pretty punchy with its pricing across the board, hasn't it, recently, with the pricing for the Hornet range, things like that, and it seems to be continuing that policy into all its bikes. Just chuck it into this corner here, and yeah, it's really good fun. And that comes back to something I was saying in the introduction about how one of the reasons I think this motorbike is kind of capturing people's imagination is that, you know, before motorbikes got expensive and complicated and all the rest of it, people bought motorbikes because they were affordable transport and accessible. And that seems to be the spirit that this GB350S is tapping into. And that's why I think riders of all levels are kind of fired up by it. Whether they're kind of new to motorcycling, considering motorcycling, or, you know, been doing it a long time and are thinking, well, you know, I've got my big adventure bike, I've got my sports bike. For the sake of £4,000, I might just stick one of these in the garage as well. You know, maybe use it as a basis for some customization, something like that. And I think by tapping into that sort of innocent fun aspect of motorcycling, but doing it with the reassurance of being a Honda rather than one of those small brands where you're not sure if you're going to be able to get parts for it or if it's going to be reliable or anything like that. You know, this is a Honda, so you can buy it with absolutely every confidence. It'll be reliable, there's the support network behind you and all that kind of thing. And I think particularly for new riders, for whom motorcycling is a whole new world, that reassurance is going to be really, really important. And based on this short little ride out on it, I can fully expect Honda is going to be selling absolutely shed loads of these to riders of all levels. And you know what? Absolutely fair play to them. I did start the ride wondering if, you know, this was maybe a little bit overhyped, you know, everybody kind of jumping on the bandwagon, but no. First impressions, It's an absolutely brilliant little bike. And I hope they sell tons and win over a whole load of new people to motorcycling, because weirdly this basic little single cylinder bike could prove to be an absolute game changer in its own way. There we go. Quick first impressions of GB350S. Believe the hype. So there we go, there's a quick flavour of the GB350S, and in moments like this it's always tempting to try and be the cool one, you know, the one who doesn't believe the hype, who says, yeah, it's all overrated, but I'm afraid, yeah, I'm not that cool, as you'll have got from the Onboard there. I did really enjoy this bike a lot. And it's interesting, isn't it, that a simple single-cylinder air-cooled bike like this, a cheap bike, can somehow be portrayed as the future of motorbiking, but in some ways I think it possibly is. So if you're coming at this as an older rider, a more experienced rider, perhaps who grew up riding on bikes like this back in the day, you can look at it as a kind of nice nostalgic throwback. And if you're new to riding or thinking of getting into motorcycling, you can look at this and go, well, that's affordable, isn't it? It's not scary. It's a Honda, so I can buy it in the confidence it's not going to break down or anything like that, and it's going to be cheap to run as well. So for a huge cross-section of riders or potential riders, I think this is a really appealing prospect. And obviously, as motorcycling desperately needs to attract newer, younger riders, it's a really important bike in that respect. So yes, I think certainly believe the hype in that. Was there anything I didn't like about the bike? Well, not really. It's, you know, obviously you're getting on a cheap 20 horsepower, 21 horsepower bike, no frills on it, you know, it delivers on what you expect. So, you know, if you want to go faster or have loads of tech, there are other bikes in the market, so you're not going to be disappointed by that. It's just really fun to ride. I enjoy the fact that, you know, you don't have to get suited up in leathers or think about, you know, wearing an airbag or anything like that to enjoy it. You can just get on it and enjoy it at a nice, sensible speed, and it's just good fun. If I were being a little bit picky, I'd say the colours that Honda are offering in the UK are a little bit sombre, you know, black, grey, baby blue. I did see some pictures of another one with a yellow tank, that looked really cool. So, you know, maybe a little bit more choice in the colours would be nice, but I'm sure people are going to be customising them. I'd be very interested to see what people do with them. One word to the wise, the painted tank does look lovely, but the paint is a little bit vulnerable to chipping, so just be careful when you're sticking your keys in to open the filler cap to fill it up. Just watch yourself with that, because you don't want to chip that lovely painted tank. Apart from that, difficult to fault really, but I'd be interested to hear what you think. So join me in the comments. Tell me if you think this is the future of motorbiking or just an overhyped, cheap, slow bike. I'd be interested to know your views. If you like the video, make sure you hit like. If you're not subscribed already, please do so. And for now, I'll say goodbye, thanks for watching, and ride safe.